Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and good day to everyone that is tuning in from all over the world. Thank you once again for joining us today at ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo for yet another session of In Conversation with David Strike. Today, we are back again from the previous audio technicalities problems that we had with this particular session, but we are very happy to have him back. And now he will be sharing with us conversationally and transport us in his exploration in depth. And he is none other than Barry McGill. So I would like to start this session by introducing Barry. Barry McGill is a deep wreck photographer and technical diving instructor, trainer based in Ireland. His main area of focus is the exploration of deep water shipwrecks around the Irish coastline, where he has been fortunate enough to discover and explore many significant and previously undiscovered shipwrecks. Sharing his passion for deep shipwreck exploration through his images, including those of many previously unphotographed wrecks. Barry has been featured in several television documentaries, while his images have appeared in a number of books and other publications. And this includes the New York Times. And the next one that I would like to introduce is none other than our moderator himself, which is David Stride. David is he has a background in military, commercial, recreational, and also technical diving. David Strike is a regular speaker and also a presenter at regional and international diving events, a former field editor for Asian Diver magazine, who has also authored several hundred articles about diving and organized several world-class technical diving events. He is the recipient of the ADEX Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to technical diving, and also a fellow of the Explorers Club of New York. Herewith, without further ado, I'd like to hand over this session over to David. David, over to you.
Thank you, Nora. Barry, welcome. Welcome back after a couple of months.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me back. It's great to have an opportunity to chat again.
Well, I think they had sort of problems last time with the audio visual. So some of the ground, obviously, I'll go back over because I'm interested in it anyway, and who cares if no one else is. And so, Barry, welcome once again. What I'm going to do, rather than go into your background, because you started diving in 2000, the year 2000, tell me a little bit about where you live in Ireland.
Well, where I'm from in Ireland would be the northwest corner, a place called Donegal. Right. So it's kind of the very northwest corner. And basically it's near an area called Malin Head. So the most northerly point in Ireland would be called Malin Head, which is generally what wreck divers refer to as kind of the area to go diving. It would be the kind of most well-known area in Ireland for diving. But generally the north coast of Ireland is where all the majority of the shipwreck diving is, because of the channel into the Irish Sea, into Liverpool and stuff like that, and into the Clyde. So most of the shipping from World War I and World War II would have went along the North Donegal coastline. And it would have been the first area of land that they would have seen on any of the transatlantic journeys. So for that reason, I suppose, growing up in Donegal, you end up being by the sea, but then you find out, you know, if you're a diver, that there's loads of shipwrecks just off the coastline, which I suppose caused me a lot of, caused my friends probably, or my family, more sleepless nights than it has me now with all the diving I do. But overall, it's probably it's a really nice kind of rural part of Ireland. Like, it's quite remote. It's about 4 hours from Dublin, so it's quite forgotten, I suppose.
And the environment itself there is very good for photographers, I believe. I.e., there's not a lot of sediment.
Yeah, like I suppose if you go to the south coast of Ireland, it's quite dark, and visibility on the south coast of Ireland and on the east coast of Ireland is generally about 10 meters, whereas in North Donegal and on the west coast of Ireland, you can get 40-50 meter visibility. at some times of the year. And generally it's 20 to 30 meter visibility in average. You get ambient light all the way down to 130, 140 meters. So like, I suppose from a photographer point of view, and especially a shipwreck photography point of view, you probably couldn't get a better place to do deep wreck photography, because you don't need lights for the majority of the wrecks. So for me, like it's probably I couldn't think of anywhere better to live or to dive, at least.
And you've been a little bit of an ambassador for the area as well. I think sort of so many people I know have now sort of touched base with you or been diving with you in those areas at some of the wrecks.
Yeah, like I suppose when I started diving up there, very few Irish people were diving in the North Donegal area, or the Malin Head area, as people refer to it as. There was only a few kind of technical divers back in the late 90s, early 2000s from Ireland, or based in Ireland. The likes of Norman Wood and Kim Cox were diving the wrecks, but the majority of people in Ireland weren't diving them. And I suppose more people were diving them from the UK on liveaboards than they were from the island of Ireland. But then the likes of Norman and Kim probably started diving, and I suppose with the internet you kind of find out that there is people locally diving the wrecks, so you can kind of get a foothold or a way onto the boats. Because I know in the early days the likes of Norman and them would have travelled to the UK over to Scotland and got a boat back to Ireland to do the diving, because it was all liveaboards, but you couldn't board in Ireland. You had to board in Scotland and travel across. Really? And then travel all the way back to Scotland and then travel back to Ireland. So like when the likes of Norman and them started, they had no option of diving 12 miles off the Irish coast other than going on the liveaboards, really. Or I think they did use their own ribs and stuff as well, but to do the deeper wrecks and the longer dives, and to get a big group of people, they were traveling to the UK to travel back again.
Now, you'll have to forgive me here, because having paid £10 to escape the Northern Hemisphere and come to the warm waters of Australia, the idea of diving in the North Atlantic from a rib, you've got to be fairly dedicated, haven't you?
It's an acquired taste, I'd say, more than anything. So it made great sense even when I started diving up there. It was all rib diving, and it was you didn't know any better, I suppose. But there was no other options. But then thankfully kind of from kind of Norman convinced one of the local fishermen who had a charter boat taking out anglers to basically take out divers. And he probably is now one of the best diving skippers I've ever dived with. A guy, Michael McVeigh, on a boat called the Ross Gill. But he's probably spent the last 20 odd years taking divers out to these shipwrecks. But the funny thing about it, from his point of view, I suppose, is he only ever deals with divers that dive 60 meters to 160. He doesn't understand recreational diving. He has no background in it. He doesn't dive himself. So for him, a 4-hour dive to 100 meters or 120 meters is normal. He doesn't see anything different in it. So there's good things and bad things about that.
I suppose a definite plus factor.
Well, he doesn't give out to you when you do 5 or 6 hours in the water, because he doesn't know any different.
He doesn't know any better.
Exactly. He's not giving out to you from spending more than 40 minutes in the water. So we try not to tell him that it's not normal.
Mate, just back to your own sort of diving career. So the first wreck, and I've got a cheat sheet here, so if I keep looking down, it's your first wreck dive was the RMS Laurentic.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most accessible of the, I suppose, the North or the Malin Head classics, as they're referred to. So the kind of the shipwrecks that people travel off from all around the world, especially from the UK, probably to dive. So like Laurentic is it's in about 38 meters. So it's very accessible from a point of view of recreational divers. And it's a White Star liner. So like it was built in the same dockyard as Titanic. It's Harland and Wolff. But I suppose from a point of view, like if when I was starting off in technical diving, you read about the gold ship, and in Donegal it's referred to as the gold ship because there's been 2 expeditions salvage gold from the wreck, and there's been tons of gold recovered in the first salvage operation. And there is then, like, if you read all the books, there is a number of bars still missing, and there's all these stories about how some of the bars are on the wreck, or maybe the commercial divers at the time squirreled a couple away. And then there's stories about, like, I heard a story as well where, like, there was some sort of factory in Derry, which is nearby, say, where all the gold was landed, and that some truck came through the gates and banged off a black brick, and the brick started looking like gold. And so, there's all these stories about the missing gold from the Laurentic. There's about 5 or 6 bars, and
How much was it? As a matter of interest, do you know how much gold was being carried by?
Oh, I forget the exact how many million, but there was millions of pounds at the time.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I know there's about 5 or 6 bars unaccounted for, but there was hundreds of bars recovered in the salvage operations. I don't know the exact figures, but maybe £5 million back in World War One, 1917. So about 5 million, I think, but I wouldn't be 100% sure now on the top of my head. But I know from I was about 18, 19 when I dived the wreck, but I know, like, it was a really big deal traveling up to do the wreck. But I remember reading a book called, it's a book by the owner of the wreck, Ray Cossum, called We Own the Laurentic. And the whole book goes into the salvage operation and the gold, and, like, coming down the shot line onto the wreck for the first time, and all you think as an 18-year-old is, I want to find a bar of gold, I want to find gold.
I guess that must have been the driving force for so many sort of early wreck divers anyway. The initial sort of attraction was in finding treasure.
That's it. Like, and I suppose Donegal was really untouched until, like, the Laurentic would have been dived in the 80s and 90s. It's been quite well dived over the years. But even in the late 90s, early 2000s, none of the wrecks from 60 meters onwards were dived. So definitely, like, technical diving has kind of come on in the late 90s, early 2000s. But you had hundreds of shipwrecks that were completely untouched. And I think, look, at a big part of that would have been the drive to find treasure on these shipwrecks.
That's what drove you to take up technical diving, was it?
I think diving somewhere like Laurentic, it definitely opened your world to what a shipwreck was like and what shipwreck diving was like. There was an excitement factor in swimming around a wreck and seeing guns and positions and seeing different parts of the ship. And like in Laurentic, you can swim into the armory and you can see all the ammunition that's all laid out in the boxes. And, it brings it's not just a big lump of metal lying on the seabed. Like, there's kind of a story behind it. It's quite a, and then I suppose reading about the history, especially the salvage operations, gives you another understanding of it's different than going out and doing scenic diving and looking at fish or looking at wildlife. It gives you a different element to it.
I know it's jumping ahead a little bit, but how did you get into photography then?
I suppose I spent a couple of years diving kind of the shipwrecks, and with you're swimming around all these wrecks and you're getting deeper and deeper and you're going to new wrecks, and you come home after a weekend's diving or a week's diving and you're all excited, but most of your friends don't dive, and even the friends that do dive don't dive the shipwrecks, and they don't really understand why. All you want to do is tell people about what you've seen and why you're going up there every weekend or why you're traveling there, and they don't really get it. And you're trying to explain what it's like underwater, but most people think it's pitch black, really cold and miserable, and you can't see very much. So trying to explain that wasn't really working. So in the end up, like the likes of Lee Bishop, I suppose, and his photography up there, you ended up trying to use his website to explain to people why you were going there. But then you were swimming across the stuff on the wrecks and you were going, oh, that's amazing. but again, you couldn't explain what you were seeing to people. So being able to take photographs, I suppose, was a way of explaining to my friends and family what I was doing. So
because you actually joined Lee on a number of expeditions, didn't you?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be invited along on a trip down to Falmouth with him back in around 2007, I think. 2007, to dive some of the new shipwrecks down there. And I've done a couple of trips since that as well. So no, I've been very lucky now to do a lot of diving with Lee over the years. And again, when we started diving Laurentic, we invited Lee over to Ireland to do a talk in the university that I was in. And I remember talking to Lee and bending his ear about how do I get out to the deeper 60, 70 meter shipwrecks. And he kind of looked at me a bit funny and said, like, get a group of friends and go diving, just start it out and go, because I suppose at the time I didn't know the likes of Norman and Stuart Andrews very well. So we didn't have a group in Ireland. So my view was I had to travel, get people from the UK and travel over and dive shipwrecks, whereas I suppose Lee planted the seed about doing it ourselves as such. So he took away a little bit of the mystery, I suppose, of how to do it. But yeah, he's been a very good influence over the years.
Yeah. So back to the wrecks, because after the Laurentic, you then went on and got involved in technical diving with IANTD, and like many people, the first nitrox course, I guess, which was the devil gas. And after a few months, you realized you weren't going to die horribly and painfully through breathing it.
No, that was definitely kind of doing something like advanced nitrox really opened up a different world to me. Because even we done our first technical course with a guy called Tim Doyle. He's an Irish technical instructor, but he was a commercial diver back in the 60s and 70s in the North Sea. So it was a different world. Talking to Tim, he doesn't talk like a normal diver. It's all slang words, and he's your typical kind of gruff commercial diver. And some of the stories about diving, in the North Sea back in the late, the 60s and 70s was, what they got up to and how they didn't dive commercial diving up there. I suppose as a recreational diver at the time, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And then hearing stories about like the Laurent, he was a support diver on one of the first dives on the Lusitania. There was an American guy, I think, came over to dive Lusitania.
Right.
Tim was a local, was down in Cork, and he was commercial diving at the time, and he was playing around with technical diving and trimix at the time back in the late 80s, I'd say. And he ended up being support diver for this American guy that was going to dive the Lusitania for the first time. But Tim was supposed to go to like 60 meters and wait for him to come up again. But the American guy met Tim on the bottom, swimming around, having a look at the Lusitania. So, and hearing all them stories, like, was kind of, again, it's a different world altogether. You look at it from a recreational diver, hear these stories about diving deep shipwrecks and trimix, and you probably understand very little about technical diving, but it's you just realize it's a completely different world.
What, so your first wreck dive on the Justicia?
Yeah.
That was, 2005? That was a 72 meter.
Yeah, would have been back kind of on a twin set open circuit at the time. Yeah. I suppose from looking at the likes of the photographs from Lee, like one of the most iconic photographs in technical diving is the bow of the Justicia. Again, like it's with Justicia, like it's a Cunard liner, but it was crewed with White Star crew because the Britannic had sank. So basically Cunard couldn't get a crew together, and basically White Star had a crew sitting there doing nothing. So basically, even though it was a Cunard liner, it had a White Star crew from the Britannic.
Right.
But as technical diving goes, I think the bow Justicia is probably one of the iconic things to dive. So
how did it sink, Barry? Well,
it was attacked by So it was attacked by 2 U-boats. So in July 1918,
Right.
it basically was attacked by UB-64, and UB-64 fired a number of torpedoes and damaged the ship. And then for the next around 20 hours, they tried to tow it back to land. So they were trying to save it by towing it in towards the Irish coastline. But on about 18, 20 hours after the initial attack, another U-boat came along, UB-124, and UB-124 fired another torpedo, and that was the final straw, and basically sank Justitia then. So it took 2 U-boats basically to sink it.
Wow. And the interesting thing there is you actually then found one of the U-boats that had sunk it, didn't you?
Yeah, so I suppose back in 2015, we were very lucky. Like we've been looking for operational U-boats in Donegal, I think probably since 2006, 2007, trying to find, there's 4 or 5 different operational U-boats that hadn't been located, and we were very lucky kind of in 2015 to locate and dive the UB-124, which was the second U-boat that attacked Justitia, and that's the one that finally sank the wreck, Justitia. So it's about 8 miles from the sinking from where Justitia sank to where we found the U-boat, and it's probably about 8 miles from from the record of where the U-boat was supposed to have been sank. So it's a long, it's not where it's supposed to be as such, but it's very special to, you dive a shipwreck like like an operational U-boat, but there's no big sign when you hit the bottom going, this is UB-124, it sank Justitia. And so you spend, 30, 40 days trying to land on U-boats, thinking this might be an operational U-boat this might be UB-124, and most of the time it's not. It's something else, or a rock or sand, or a small little coastal steamer or a trawler, or and then all of a sudden you land in this U-boat. And in Donegal there's Operation Deadlight from World War II, so we've got loads of scrapped U-boats, that were sunk at the end of World War II. So the majority of U-boats we ever dive are part of Deadlights. But then you're swimming around and you're looking for these clues to tell you this isn't a Deadlight, this is from World War I. So you're looking for deck guns and those big deck guns from World War I were the key to try and identify it at the start. And then you're swimming around the conning tower, and all of a sudden you see this deck gun lying on the seabed, and it's like, oh, this isn't, this has to be a World War I U-boat. And it's very exciting trying to piece together on the bottom as you're diving what you're diving, because again, there's no guidebook to what you're looking for down there. But I think trying to close off the story of Justitia, like we dived Justitia, 40, 50 times, but to be able to dive the U-boat that actually physically sank it is really cool. Like to be able to kind of add another piece to the story is really exciting.
How did it? How was the U-boat sunk? By one of the escorting?
So there was a number of escort. I think there was 2 different escort destroyers basically onto the town. So when UB-124 attacked Justitia, it was being towed to land. So there would have been a lot of other escort ships around it trying to protect it. And then once they realized there was another U-boat in the area, they went searching for it. And then while they were searching for it, basically they located it and it was depth charged. So basically, when it was depth charged, then as far as I remember from the story, UB-124 was damaged, and then it couldn't stay submerged. So it basically had to come to the surface, and the crew had to abandon, and then it was basically scuttled and sank again. So
wow.
So it's quite a story. Like, and even like they traveled 8 miles from where they sunk Justitia, and like 8 miles in the while submerged. U-boats traveled quite slow in World War I underwater. They weren't on diesel power, so it was from a crew point of view, being hunted for 10, 12 hours underwater and then being forced to surface. knowing that there was destroyers on the surface, that must have been a nerve-wracking experience, I suppose. And the other alternative would have been to stay on the bottom, and they couldn't stay any longer on the bottom. So.
And sorry, from a personal point of view, the interesting thing there, the Justicia, you were diving on open circuit, I take it.
Yeah, the first year or two would have all been open circuits. Would have been a twin set with a little bit of helium to take off the narcosis. We probably at the start we weren't even Trimix qualified divers. We were kind of advanced nitrox, but we were just sticking a little bit of helium in to take the edge off. And then
how much did that cost you, as a matter of interest? Because it used to be quite sort of exorbitantly costly here.
Well, I was in college at the time, so the first trip I done there was like a weekend, and I didn't have enough money to pay. I had enough money to pay for the boat, but I didn't have enough cash to pay for the gas. So another one of the guys who I dive with a lot now, he runs a lot of the trips to Lusitania that I dive on. A guy called Pat Coughlin, he offered to buy I had a 7-liter stage cylinder. He offered to buy the stage cylinder off me for like €150, and that paid for my gas for the weekend. So I just gave him my stage cylinder, and he paid my bills. So that's how I paid for my gas that weekend. So,
the submarine, you were diving on closed circuit.
Closed circuit, yeah. So we'd have been on rebreathers then. I spent maybe 2 or 3 years diving on open circuit Trimix. But from a cost point of view, it didn't really work. Trying to pay for open circuit gases, especially helium. But then also, you're diving these 60, 70 meter shipwrecks, and you're spending 20 minutes, 25 minutes on the shipwreck. But there's a guy beside you on a rebreather, and he's spending 40, 50 minutes on the same wreck, and you're waiting around for an hour and a half while he finishes his deco, and you're sitting on the boat. You start looking at it, well, if I buy one of them, I can stay on the bottom longer and see more of the shipwreck. So
yeah, but you'd get the biscuits before he did back in the boat. So
true, there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, mate, there's always a plus. What you started to do sort of work for TV, for various documentaries as well. You've been involved with that.
I was very lucky, I suppose, that the group I was diving with, they started doing the Trimix diving with, was led by a guy called Norman Woods, I mentioned earlier. And Norman he was kind of doing Trimix diving in Ireland before anybody else. But with Norman, he was really good at underwater video.
Right.
So he had contacts with a couple of different kind of production companies, and he'd done a couple of jobs, like he done filming on the AA2, the Australian submarine. So he'd worked on a project for that, for Deep Wreck Mysteries, I think was the series. So the second series of Deep Wreck Mysteries then was going to be shot in Donegal, and they were going to film HMS Audacious, and we were going to try to locate and dive HMS Curacao, which hadn't been found. So I was really lucky, kind of, because I was diving with Norman at the time. I got myself and my dive buddy Stuart Andrews were brought on basically as light monkeys. So we had to carry the lights basically and basically don't make a mess of the video as they shot it for the documentary. So I suppose it was a great eye-opening experience. Like, you got to spend 2 weeks in Donegal diving for free. All the diving was paid for, and all you had to do was basically swim around these shipwrecks that you normally swim around anyway, and hold lights for.
And that's the Curacao was. This is a personal plug here, but it was your memorable dive in the Dining with Divers cookbook, which I'll tell people about your recipe later. But that was your memorable dive, was actually on the Curacao.
Yeah.
What was the Curacao?
Like, Curacao was basically a light cruiser. But the special, it was originally in operation in World War I, but it had gone through World War I, then had been converted into anti-aircraft or basically anti-aircraft support for the convoys in World War II. So it had been retrofitted with basically anti-aircraft guns for basically when the convoys came across the Atlantic, the Curacao would meet up with these large convoys and they would basically give air support. So their main fear would have been the German Air Force or the Luftwaffe basically bombing the convoys. So the Curacao was part of that. But I suppose the tragic thing about the Curacao was it sank in friendly fire as such. So it would have been escorting the Queen Mary across the Atlantic.
Right.
But Curacao was quite old at the time and slow. So it couldn't keep up pace with the Queen Mary. And the Queen Mary was much faster, traveling at about 28 knots. Now, you'd probably know yourself from, with the convoys, they all travel in a zigzag. So they do course changes at predetermined times, and basically so that a U-boat, very unlikely that the U-boat could line up to attack. But there was because the Curacao couldn't keep up with the Queen Mary, it was traveling in a straight line. But as they came close to the Irish coast, they were probably about 55 miles off the Irish coast. Basically, the two ships crossed paths, and the Queen Mary basically went straight through the middle of the Curacao and cut the Curacao right in two.
Right.
So, like, you imagine, like, Queen Mary is one of a massive transatlantic liner. The Curacao is a light cruiser. It's a quarter of the size of the Queen Mary, and basically the Queen Mary's bow went straight through midships or just behind midships on the Curacao, cut it right in two, left it in two complete sections that are about 800 meters apart now on the seabed, and the Curacao sank in about 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes. Everything was basically, the surface was empty, and there was just basically bits of floating wreckage and basically casualties in the water. So really a tragic story, I suppose. Like, from a survivor's point of view, there was very few survivors. The majority of the survivors came from there was an air defense platform on the top as a lookout. Most of the survivors came from that, the highest point of the ship. Anybody that was below decks, basically, I think only 1 or 2 people survived from below decks. But it's quite a sad story. And from a point of view of diving it, then it's 55 miles offshore, and it hadn't been located when we done the
what sort of depth was it at, Barry?
It's in about 125 meters.
Right.
So I suppose back when I was it's really deep from a point of view of shipwreck diving. And when we dived it first, I think it was 2007 from memory. And from that point of view, it was the deepest dive I'd ever done at that point. And I think dropping down and it's because it's 55 miles offshore and the seabed is quite gravelly and sandy, you get ambient light down there. Like, you don't need a torch at 125. And you hit the bottom, and all of a sudden there's this big massive shipwreck lying there, and you can see everything for 40, 50 meters around you. And it's quite a special thing.
Can you penetrate the parts of it?
Yeah, so the bow section is upside down. It's turned turtle. So you can actually get it's quite intact other than it's upside down. But you can kind of get underneath it and you can get inside it to an extent. There hasn't been a whole lot of penetration on the bow section as such, because of the depth, and but you can get underneath it, and some of the really nice features like the bridge, basically, or the flying bridge, which would have been just above the bridge, is kind of underneath it, but you can get underneath that area and see all the compasses and the different basically ways of communicating, and some of the devices within the bridge are still all sitting there attached to the deck. And then the stern section is about 800 meters away, and with the stern section, it's upright, so it's just lying a little bit to port. So, but the deck is perfect. So all your anti-aircraft guns are pointing towards the sky, and beside all the anti-aircraft guns, there's wooden boxes full of the ammunition, and it's like basically you're swimming across the deck of the ship, which is, again, from a diver point of view, it's amazing to swim along a flat deck and be able to see the gun, and then swim up to the gun, be able to see all the ammunition lying beside the gun, and it being half empty, like a wooden box with a half load of shells in it. So it's a really nice shipwreck, but it's quite an eerie shipwreck as well, given that there was a massive loss. There was a massive loss of life on it. Can see, you can see some of the sailors' boots and stuff that are lying on the shipwreck. So it's a really special wreck, but it also is quite eerie. I know during
how do you actually feel? Because a lot of those wrecks, are they declared sort of war graves or?
Yeah, like Curacao would be considered a war grave. It's protected by the British Admiralty or British Navy. Now it's not, like in Scapa Flow you've got the Royal Oak, and they're more protected, I suppose, because they're closer to shore. But you do need to have, like, in Ireland, say if it's over 100 years old, you have to have a license to dive certain shipwrecks that are over 100 years old. Now the Curacao isn't protected in Ireland because it isn't over the 100 years yet. But the British MOD would expect it to be protected, I suppose. But it's a little bit difficult because it's in international waters off the coast of Ireland. They don't have the same jurisdiction, so it's a bit like the South China Seas and the repulse and stuff. They're protected by the MOD to a level, but they don't have an absolute exclusion. Like if you dive the Hampshire in Scapa Flow, or you dive the Royal Oak in Scapa Flow, you don't get on them because they're monitored. And you have to have a special permit. But because of the way the Curacao is, it's not as protected. But saying that, like, we dived it first in 2006, I would probably say maybe 30 people have dived it since. And the majority, I would say, I think, as far as I understand, we're probably the only group that have ever dived it. There's a group of maybe, there's one boat that has visited it in the last kind of 10, 15 years.
Still keeping on the subject of those the warships, the other, and the one that, because the images that you've taken of it, I just think are superb. The Hearst Castle, which was a corvette, and the Hearst Castle, that was another war. That was the Second World War, was it not? Or...
September 1944.
Right.
And basically Hearst Castle would have been like a U-boat hunter. So you're talking, the Battle of the Atlantic, and the big fear for all the convoys would have been U-boat attack. And the British Admiralty would have developed some amazing technology during World War II to detect and to hunt U-boats. And like Hearst Castle as a dive is quite a small. It was built at the beginning of World War II. It was very cheaply built, and nowadays there's very little of the ship left. Like you can see the bow, a couple of bits of the main structure, but the majority, and the engines, and the boilers, but the majority of the wreck is gone. It's just basically dissolved into the seabed. But I suppose from a diver's point of view, the Squid Launchers are still there, and during World War II, they would have, they developed this sonar technology where they could basically ping a U-boat, but then they could chase that U-boat underwater, and they could fire basically, for want of a better word, kind of grenades, or basically hedgehogs, or squids as they were called, which are a modification of the hedgehog mine, and they could fire them forward of the Hearst Castle at a target underwater. So it was like, if you think about, you see all the videos of depth charging where the ships would have drove along and basically rolled over the depth charges over the back of or over the side of the ship and hoped to land it on the U-boat. Whereas by that 1944 in World War II, they were able to basically target U-boats underwater, and then we're able to fire basically the squids ahead of themselves and try to target the U-boats. So it really did change kind of U-boat warfare, because the U-boats then found it very difficult to survive based on that technology. But I suppose from a Hearst Castle point of view, it was taken out, or it was sunk by a U-boat, like UB, I think it was 428, basically managed to sink it. So even though the Hearst Castle was able to hunt U-boats were still able to kind of retaliate.
Yeah.
And because it's so lightly built, a torpedo strike on the Hearst Castle, it didn't stand a chance. Because,
well, they're very small sort of vessels anyway, aren't they? Sort of a crew of less than 100.
And the hulls were really thin. Like even now, when you dive the Hearst Castle now, the hull plate doesn't exist. Like there's next to no hull plating left, other than on the bow. You won't see the side of the ship anywhere. Like all this.
What sort of depth is Hearst Castle?
It's about 85 meters.
Right.
82 to 85 meters. So it's quite accessible with rebreathers nowadays. Like it's quite a nice depth. You get, you can get 50 minutes an hour on it relatively easy. So
you're a rebreather instructor as well.
Yeah, for my sins, that's what I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to convince people that their investment in €10,000 in a rebreather it's going to be worth it by going to all these shipwrecks. So
yeah, which one? You've used a number of them, haven't you?
Yeah, over the years I have. The two main ones I use are the JJ and then the AP Vision.
Right.
So when I started off diving, I would have started off on the AP, the Classic, and I would have moved on to the Vision then in around 2007, and I dived that all the way along. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I suppose I changed over to the JJ. I still teach on both, but most of my diving nowadays is on a JJ.
So what do you do? Do you actually sort of, with your training, are you training people to be wreck divers or to be
generally it's wreck divers, but like most people that come to me for rebreather training are looking at trying to get to shipwrecks in that 60 meter, 70 meter range and the trimix range basically. But generally they're coming to me as, a twin set diver who's diving advanced nitrox, and in 2 or 3 years time want to be able to dive trimix on a rebreather. So generally they're doing 2 or 3 courses to get that level. But most people have a motivation of diving a 60 meter or a 70 meter wreck, in mind. Right. So like the Malhead Classics that we talked about a little bit earlier, like the Justitia, the Audacious, the Empire Heritage, them kind of shipwrecks are why people dive rebreathers, or the majority of people in Ireland are trying to get trained up to dive a rebreather. So I kind of get 2 types of students: one that's never dived a rebreather that wants to learn to dive a rebreather to then go down the road of trimix, or the other student I would get is someone that already dives a rebreather with air diluent, who wants to go to dive 60 meters or deeper, and are looking for the trimix kind of upgrade, so they can dive deeper on their rebreather as well. So
you're also teaching them sort of photography as well, because this, your images are just sort of superb.
It's probably the best way to advertise technical diving is the images, because I suppose most people don't want to invest all that money in diving for the sake of diving, but when they have that carrot of, you can see these shipwrecks when you do it, I think most people, that's what gets them into it. I'm kind of very lucky over the last 5 or 6 years. I've started running trips to Donegal where we do 5 or 6 different weeks during the summer months, where we bring divers from all around the world to Donegal to dive these shipwrecks.
I know Pete Mesley's been over, hasn't he?
Yeah, he caused havoc when he came over with all his photographs.
I don't believe that for one moment.
Yeah, he drank us out of all the wine and beer, and then he took great photographs and made us all look bad at how good the photographs. So I think I need to drink more red wine, and then I'll be a better photographer like Keith and stuff. But I think with them trips, you know, it's been great to get loads of photographers coming over as part of them trips and taking photographs. But also a lot of people have come on the trips, seen, you know, the shipwrecks, and then have come back again with cameras, and they're trying to learn. So like one of the things when you're trying to bring people on these shipwrecks is trying to give them advice of where to go on the shipwreck or how to take a photograph of a particular shipwreck. You know, and I suppose I'm lucky that most of the trips we do, I've dived the wrecks loads of times in the past, so I can kind of give them advice on what to target or what to focus on, or you know, you can kind of give them a little bit of an insider tip of where to go for the photographs. And I think with the age of social media and Facebook, nowadays, every diver in the boat that doesn't have a camera are nearly fighting to get in front of the camera. They want the photographs for their own social media. So it's great on trips now that you have 10 or 12 divers, and nearly they're all trying to get into the shots, and it actually makes the image, because you get a shipwreck and divers, and I think it's been a really positive in diving that, you know, at the start people didn't want to be in a photograph. You know, they were happy swimming around, but nowadays they want to be in the photographs as well. Which
yes. And I guess the most iconic shipwreck in Ireland has to be the Lusitania. And you've now dived that how many times?
I probably tried to dive it about 15 different times. But I probably got about, I probably dived it about 12 or 13 physical dives on it. But we've had lots of trips that have been blown out because of the weather. It's a little bit harder to dive. It's probably a 50% chance of diving Lusitania with regard to weather. It's quite a hard area. But I've probably got about just over 10, 12 dives on it, which compared to the other shipwrecks I've dived in Ireland, it's not as many. Like we would dive the other shipwrecks a lot more. It's just a little bit hard to dive Lusitania with regard to licensing and then weather on top of that. So you tend not to dive it as regular, but it's the one shipwreck you dive that no matter who your friends are or your family, they're not interested in diving. Every single one of them have heard of Lusitania. Yeah. And they're all their ears kind of perk when they hear the word Lusitania, whereas you talk about the Curacao or the Hearst Castle, it kind of goes over their heads, whereas everybody's interested in the Lusitania because of the name and
I mean, I must admit, at a personal level, your images of the Hearst Castle, I've just thought were just superb. You know, it was. I like.
I've probably more bad ones than good ones, but eventually you get the nice.
What's your favourite at a personal level? What's your favourite shipwreck?
I think HMS Audacious. It's like a dreadnought battleship up in Donegal. Yeah. So it was sank in 1914 at the beginning of World War I. But anybody that's dived, any kind of a World War I or World War II kind of era ship, like it's the guns. But on the Audacious, it's a dreadnought battleship, so the guns are massive. So you're talking 13.5-inch, double barreled turrets basically, and you could spend 20 days diving and trying to find all the guns on the ship. Like it's basically a floating lump of steel with a load of guns out both sides. And from a point of view of a diver, it's in 60 meters of water, so it's relatively shallow and accessible. You can easily get an hour on the bottom and swim around. And then it's opened up over the last 15 years, so you can kind of get inside it, you can penetrate it, and you can easily do 20 or 30 dives and not dive the same area.
Wow. And how's it sitting on the seabed? So, is it upright? Or?
No, it's like most battleships, it's turned upside down. So it's actually turned turtle. So when we dived it first, the hull was mostly intact. So it was the top of the ship was the keel. Yeah. So the bottom would have been the top. and you couldn't see anything at the top other than the basically the keel, and you were only really seeing the guns at one end, propellers at the other end. But in the last kind of 15 years, it's all kind of sank down. A lot of the hull plating has corroded away and collapsed. So now you can get into the engines, you can get in, you can penetrate underneath from the seabed and swim through it. You can also penetrate from the top and drop down into the engines or into the machinery areas. One of the turrets, the main turret that's photographed, would have been at the front near the explosion. Nobody's 100% sure is it A turret or B turret, but the main kind of picture of the Audacious is these two guns attached to a turret, but you can actually climb inside that turret.
Wow!
And you can get to the breaches, and like the breaches are, if you were to, they're probably 2 meter wide breaches.
Yeah.
So like if you were to go to the breach and have your arms spread out, you can't get to, they're massive guns, and inside the turret you can see all the controls, all the wheels for operating you can see the voice pipes for communicating. It's a very special shipwreck because the other side of it is too, it's built at the beginning of World War II. I think it was built around 1912. But everything is brass. Like everything you look at on there is brass. And like there's loads of like bits of brass with names of the different compartments, or there's loads of kind of writing of like a fuse box is made of solid brass, and you can see like these fuse boxes hanging on the wall, and everything is just solid brass. Like, so from a diver's point of view, it's like there's treasure everywhere. So
needless to say, everyone leaves everything intact there.
Oh yeah, like nowadays basically it's it's over 100 years old, so it comes under the National Monuments Act here in Ireland. But like when we dived up there first, say in the early 2000s, everything was there, and you were swimming along, and there was like portholes kind of lying on the seabed. There's portholes in the sides of the ship, and it's really nice because some of the stuff that you see has writing on it, so it's not even just a lump of metal. Now you can see even some places where the name Audacious is actually embossed in the footplate that they walk with the. So like even at the stern of the ship where the admiral would have boarded, basically they had a brass mat that basically would have walked onto a footplate, and the HMS or Audacious is wrote on it. Like, so it was very unique, I suppose, in that regard. And they have these clay bottles for ginger beer or ginger ale, and they're Mumby is the name of the company, but you find them in the stern of the shipwreck as well.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, so like you get some really nice kind of small little artifacts that if you look inside the shipwreck, you can come across these little features that are really
How
nice.
far offshore is that one?
It's only about 12, 13 miles offshore.
Right.
So it's actually the most accessible of the shipwrecks that we have. So the majority of the shipwrecks are 20 miles plus offshore, because they were all part of the convoy route. Whereas Audacious was in Lough Swilly, which would have been a naval port in World War I, and it was heading out to do exercises just off the north coast of Donegal. Yeah. And it basically swam into a mine. It sailed into a minefield and struck a mine. Oh. And then they tried to tow it to shore, but it sank as they were towing it to shore. Right. So that's why it's so close to shore. It's only about 12 miles offshore. Oh. So it's really accessible, but because it's so accessible, when we were diving there, it turned into being the bad weather wreck. So people, like especially divers groups that we dive with, they dive it so often that they don't want to dive it all the time. So they generally only dive it on bad days. And like the skipper I was telling you about, Michael McVeigh, I knew how I was saying that he's a technical skipper, not a recreational dive skipper. So he doesn't know what recreational divers are like very much. We had him convinced that if the weather was too bad to dive 12 miles offshore on the Audacious, it wasn't a dive day, so you didn't pay for the boat. Whereas if the weather was better, so it ended up being the bad weather wreck, that you only dived it on the worst days. And if the weather was anyway good, you went further offshore and you dived it. So You hear about boat skippers that will go into a little bay and dump you in a bay and let you dive in the bay. Michael's blowout wreck was 12 miles offshore, and basically in the last couple of years, though, he's had a couple of UK groups came over, and he's learned that people will dive in 10 meters of water in a little cove beside the harbour where we go from. And he's copped on that we've been kind of pulling the wool over his eyes with regard to what a weather day is. So.
Right. So we're getting close to the end of time at the moment, Barry, but documentaries that you've taken part in and helped document, how many? What's the better known ones? Because you've taken part in so many.
I suppose the most recent one would have been a documentary called Shipwreck Secrets.
Right.
We would have done it there in 2019. Would have been the last one, and that was basically a series from all around the world. They went to Truck and they went to the Great Lakes and they went down to Florida. And basically in Donegal, what they done is they done two different dives, one on the Justitia, talking about the sinking of the Justitia, and then they also followed us trying to locate and dive the UB124, which sank Justitia. So they built the story around basically the sinking of Justitia by UB124. Again, like it's a great experience to basically be part of these documentaries, because you get to meet historians and experts in U-boats or experts on naval warfare, so you learn a lot from it, and then you get an opportunity to dive these shipwrecks and get paid to dive these shipwrecks, so it's
even better. And who do you generally? Is there a group of you? I know you dive with Stewie a lot, Stewie Andrews, but
yeah, he's basically been a fixture of my diving, I think, since I was about 20. There's a group of Irish divers that we've been kind of. Norman Woods would have started off a group in around 2003 and 4, and that group would still be diving now, but it's changed over the years. So people have come into it and gone out of it over the years. But there'd be kind of a core group of about 10 to 15 people that we dive with regularly that would be all based in Ireland. And then I run other trips then with a couple of other groups that would kind of have people from the UK that come over every year or every second year to dive with us as well. So yeah, there's quite a strong kind of community here between Ireland and the UK that dive the wrecks.
And your business is InDepth Technical?
Yeah, and
you actually have your website, don't you? Which I'll put up.
Yeah, I need to do some work on it. I've kind of been neglecting it for a long time now, but if they follow me on Facebook as well, I generally am better on Facebook than on the website with regard to stuff.
Right, that's where a lot of your images appear.
Yeah, I'm a bit more organized on Facebook.
Yeah. And now, Barry, did we ever discuss, last time we spoke, did we discuss your favorite or your sort of signature dish of the scallops, black pudding, and sweet potato mash?
No, and I'm getting told off by my parents that I haven't cooked for them yet either.
Oh, really? Oh, dear.
Yeah. That's the good thing about COVID lockdown. I haven't been able to get back. I haven't been able to get up to them to find I can make an excuse for a little bit longer.
Yeah. Mate, that's what one day when I get over there after a pint or two, I'll get you to cook that. You've frozen, Barry. So, Nora, is that the end of the... I think we've come to the end of the session, Nora was saying.
Yeah.
Barry, so Barry, mate, thank you once again. Let me hand over to Nora to close the session. And Barry, thank you.
Thank you very
Nora,
much.
over to you.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Barry for your time to share with us your experiences in diving. and also within with the ADEX community itself. And also, of course, I'd like to thank you to Strikey for sharing with us and also the time and having this conversation with fantastic technical divers from all over. So we look forward to the one that's coming up next. If Strikey, would you like to give a teaser to the audiences? Who will be?
Who?
For the next session?
Oh, the next session will be on the 29th of April. That's with Beatrice Rivora from Italy.
Great. So everyone, if you are, I'm going to save the date, like what Strikey said. We're going to have another session with Beatrice, and we look forward to see all of you on ADEX Pixel Expo then. All right.
Okay.
Once again, thank you very much, both of you, and have a lovely day ahead. And Barry, thanks again, and Strikey, thanks as well.
Nora, thank you. Barry, once again, thank you. And I'm sure Nora will send through a link for the recording as well, so that people in other time zones can look at it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Strikey.
Okay, mate. Speak to you later.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.